Okay, so here we go. Okay, so here we go. What we're going to do, what we're going to work on today is called inverses. So this is section 10.4. 10.4, and it's called inverses. Okay. Okay, so the operations, let me just give you an overview, and then I'll show you how to specifically do it. Okay. So an overview is what we have is if you want to undo a math operation, you use the inverse. So in the past, what you've seen before is if you have an addition. So say I added 5 to something. Well, for me to get rid of the adding 5, I can do the inverse, which is subtraction. So if I took a number and I was on the number 12 and I added 5, to get rid of the adding 5, I could subtract 5. I can do the opposite. We kind of call it the opposite operation, but really it's called the inverse operation. That's its official name. And now that you're in Algebra 1, we can start giving things more official names. Division is the inverse of multiplication. Okay. So division is the inverse of multiplication. So if you're multiplying something or dividing something, and you want to kind of do the opposite math operation, that the division and multiplication are inverses. Okay, so if you divided something by 2, if you want to get back to the original number, you would multiply by 2. Now, currently in our class, we have squaring. So if you do something like 3 squared, to remove the squared, this is the inverse of square rooting. So it's the idea of in equations, how can you get rid of one that's already there? Or like say you have cube rooting. To get rid of cube rooting, you cube. We'll just call it cubing. Okay, so cube rooting is like the cube root of 8. And then cubing is like 2 cubed. Okay. So what we're going to focus on mostly today is we're going to focus mostly on lines, inverses with lines. Okay, and then squaring and cube rooting we can do next Tuesday when more people have done the square rooting and cubing homework. So when you've done the, I think it's 10.3 homework, then it'll make more sense what we'll be doing next week. Okay, so let me show you the problem. So what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on, we're going to focus on inverses of linear functions. Okay, so we're going to focus on inverses of linear functions. Okay, and then another day we'll do square roots and cube roots. We'll do that next week. Okay, so let me show you how they start. They start with f of x. Okay, so f of x equals 2x plus 6. And the question asks for the inverse. So it says, what is the inverse? Now there's a notation for inverse that we use. Okay, and the notation is F, and then it looks like a -1 exponent, but it doesn't mean a -1 exponent. It means inverse. So, and then you put the of X. And the way you say this is you say F inverse. You don't say F to the -1. You say F inverse. So that's a notation that it comes from the multiplicative inverse. It uses that -1 notation officially. And so then they started using it for all functions. So they might say the word inverse, and they might just say find F to the -1. And both of them mean the same thing. Okay. And this one, the process is going to be the same, repeated. So it's not going to be one where this question is a lot different than the other questions. Most of the questions are going to be the same. We're going to also practice graphing lines in this chapter, in this section. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is the basics of inverses. So the thing you want to remember about inverses the most. Okay. So inverses. Okay, so if in Algebra 2 they say, what's an inverse? And this is all you say, they would be so happy that you remembered. And what it is you are switching. Okay, so I'll just put switch X and Y. That's the main thing for inverses, is that you're going to switch X and Y. If it's in a table, it's really nice. You have your table, and then you just change your X and your Y, and that's all. Okay. So the problem right now is I don't have a Y in my equation. So type in the chat box if you can remember what f of x can be written as instead of f of x. It's a letter. Oh, that's weird. Oh, on my screen. On my screen, I lost the presenting, but it looks like it's fine on my tablet. So let me go back to Google Meet and hit stop presenting, and then I'll hit start presenting again, I guess. Let's see if that fixes it. Let's see. Oh, present screen. Let's see if you get my screen now. Hopefully. Looks like it. Let me go back to OneNote. Perfect. Okay. Okay, so type in the comments if any of you have, yes, exactly. So if you're going to change f of x, you can write that as the letter y. And then you can graph it like we regularly graphed y equals, say, mx plus b. This is a 6, though, so draw it as a 6. Okay, so this is the original equation, just written with a y. Okay, so maybe we'll put a little label at the left. Don't put switch. So this is going to be write f of x as y instead. Okay, so that's step number 1. Now, step number 2 is to find the inverse. So that means you switch the x and the y. Now, what you do when you switch the x and the y is you don't bring the numbers with them. You really are just cutting out the y, and your new letter is x. And you're leaving the 2 where it is. You're leaving the plus 6 where it is, but you're exchanging the x for the other letter, which is y. This allows our math to figure out in which order we undo the equation. And this is a nice way to find inverses. Some people try to just guess the inverse, but that's not usually. Oh, I forgot a question mark at the end here. What is the inverse? Okay, so that's what you do for step 2. Now, step 3 is you solve for y. Okay, so if you remember what we did when we solved for letters, is I made you put a box around them so that you could visualize that letter. So I'm going to put a box around the y. And to me, the y is kind of in the wrong spot. It's on the right side, so that's a little strange, but it's okay. I'm going to remove the 6. And then later I'm going to remove the 2. So usually you remove things that are farther away first. So how do I get rid of the positive 6? So you can type it in the comments if you know how to get rid of the positive 6. Yeah, so I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. And that's both sides of the equal sign right here. So this one is x minus 6 equals 2y. And then I need y by itself. So how do I get rid of the 2? How do I get rid of the 2? I divide, exactly. So I divide by 2. And then I usually like to divide each one by 2. Okay, so I divide them both by 2, or each by 2. And then the y is still on the right side, which looks funny to me. It looks a little backwards, but I'll switch it later. And then instead of writing x over 2, usually people write 1/2. Okay, and they write 1/2 because it'll be easier to graph the line, because this is going to be a line. So 1/2 x and then minus 3, and you work out the other side. And then, like I said, to me that looks funny, so I'm going to switch it around to the other side. So 1/2 x minus 3 was okay, but I just want to switch like the whole sides. This is what allows me to do that is it's actually called the symmetric property. You'll learn that in geometry. But it's if your answer at the end turns out to be 5 minus x, you can write x equals 5 instead. I'm sorry, 5 equals x. You could change it to x equals 5 instead. You could switch it around. It's called, I might as well write it because you're going to learn it next year, kind of at the beginning of geometry. It's called the symmetric property. But usually they don't teach that. Sometimes they teach that in algebra or in middle school math. Okay, so that's what allowed me to switch it around. I wasn't subtracting the y from both sides or adding the 3 to both sides. I was just switching the sides. And remember, we said that if you did that with a less than sign, that you also have to switch the inequality in the middle. Okay, so that's the property I just used. And then this is the answer for the inverse. So I'm going to kind of circle it. I'm going to put 1 box around it. But they want you to write the official letter. So you're going to change the y to be the f inverse notation. So just like we switched out of f of x notation, we have to switch back in to f of x, the inverse notation. And then make sure you know where the inverse goes. So the little -1 goes on the f, and then the parenthesis comes out. So this is the real final answer. This is called the inverse. What I want to do is I want to graph both of these. So I'm going to go to view. I'm going to add some grid lines here. And I want to graph both the original shape and the inverse on the same picture because they have an interesting relationship. Okay, so I'm going to graph, and then I think I'm going to highlight these. Let's see so we can see it. The original, I'm going to graph in yellow. Well, I'm going to graph, and then I'll highlight it in yellow. And then the inverse, I'm going to graph, I'm going to highlight in blue, so you'll be able to see that. And the reason I picked the ones with the y equals is because those remind me more of y equals mx plus b than the notation f of x equals. So my brain feels better when it sees the y. How would we solve that if we didn't put a y? We couldn't. So I always put a y. I always change the f of x to y first. And actually, I believe that everybody does that. So you know how different teachers teach in different ways sometimes? I'm pretty sure that this is one where everybody teaches the same way. Okay, you guys, I figured it out. I figured out my tablet turned off because I hadn't touched it. And so that's why it disappeared from the video. So I'm showing that it's still not there. So I'm thinking, let me go back to Google Meet on my tablet. And it says I'm presenting. But let me go back to my note, and it's not showing up. So I'm going to unpresent and represent again. That's okay, though. That's not going to affect you guys. So let me take this one. I'm going to hit stop presenting, and then I'm going to represent. And then that should come up again. So I don't know why it's acting so strange today. Present screen. Okay. So that's back up. Okay, so I noticed that somebody just came in, Brianna. So Brianna, just leave space for this. Okay, leave space for this. Okay, but I'm going to start the next example. And then just follow with the next example and you'll be fine. Okay, and then you can go back up and copy those notes afterwards. Okay. So this is example, let me write this. This is example 1. And then we're going to start with example 2. And then, you know, on example 1, I probably need one more step here at the end, which is change y for f inverse of x. That's the last step. I have to solve for y. Yeah, Brianna, that's totally fine. And then you can pause and everything. Yeah, so don't worry. You can just watch from the beginning, watch later. You guys, I don't put these in the grade book until Mondays. Okay, I put them in the grade book on Monday, so you do have some flexibility. Now I put the due dates there so that you could remember they're there, and then when they come in as past due, then I notice that you turned it in past due, but it doesn't matter to me if you turn it in late. Okay, I'm not putting them in until Monday. Okay, and if for some reason you don't finish by Monday and you do it later, I can look that up as well. That's a little more annoying, but I can do that. Oh, my tablet is really annoying me today. Okay, so you know, I don't know, I don't think all of you heard this, but my tablet restarted. So it must have changed a setting. So it changed a setting to turn off display. It turns it off too much. Let's see. Screen timeout. Look, 30 seconds of inactivity. Okay, that's not happening. Let's change that to 2 minutes. Okay. So you guys can't see this on my tablet anyway because you just lost my presenting. So stop presenting, but I think I fixed the problem. So, and then let me present screen again. Okay. Okay. And then here I am. Yep. There we go. Okay, so it's just because it was going off after 30 seconds. So when it restarted my tablet or redid the settings, it changed the settings that I liked. Okay. Okay, so that's how you do an inverse. So let's do another one. So example 2. Okay, and then Layla, I know you just came. So leave in your notes this much room. Okay, so that's probably a page. Okay, and then just start with us on example 2 and you'll be fine. And then you can go back and copy those notes later. Okay, so example 2. So we have f of x equals, oh, I was telling you I wanted to graph those. Let me show you one more example of the algebraic and then we'll go back and graph those. Okay, so let's say we have 3x minus 6. And it says find f, and then it says -1 of x. Okay, now in your brain, you want to call this the inverse. So every time you see that notation, you want to call it f inverse. Okay. And inverse, your job is to switch x and y. So anytime you see an inverse, that's your main plan. Switch x and y. But we were saying in example 1 that we don't have a y. So we're going to change the f of x to be a y. Oh, is anybody else not seeing the screen? So write in the chat if you're seeing the screen or if you're not seeing the screen. Okay, so somebody else can see the screen. Kayla, maybe go out and then come back in to the meeting. Okay, so let's just wait for Kayla to come back. Kayla, did that help? Can you see the screen now? Okay, perfect. Okay, so you switch, you change it to a y, and then technically you'll learn in calculus that this really is the inverse, but when people say to find the inverse, they do mean you have to find y. So when they write it with this notation, it means find y, and then change it to the F inverse notation. But if it just said the words find the inverse, technically this is the inverse. It's just not in the right format. So I'm going to call this one the inverse, but I want to get it in the right format so that that I can present it correctly. Okay. So in calculus, sometimes you're not able to solve for y, so you can't do the following steps. But in ours, we're doing lines, so you can. So we're going to add the 6 to both sides. Okay, to remove the 6. So the x and the plus 6 are on the same side. Then the equal sign drops down, then the 3y. And then how did we get rid of the 3 last time? How did we get rid of the 3 last time? Anybody remember? Yeah, divide. So let's divide. So we're going to divide by 3, and then we're going to divide each individual one by 3. Okay, so this is going to be y equals, it looks backwards, and then we said we're going to put a 1 in front of that, so that's 1/3 x, and then plus 2. And then we said we were using the symmetric property. You don't have to know the name in Algebra 1, but in Algebra 2, in geometry, they ask you to know the names of the reasons that you're using. So this is 1/3 x plus 2. And then this is the inverse also, like all of these steps, they're the inverse, but I want to use the right notation. So we're going to change the y and put the F inverse notation back. And then you put 1/3 x plus 2. So this is the answer to the question. And then this will be a fine question to graph. So we can graph this one instead. Okay. So we'll graph this one instead. So I'm going to highlight this one in yellow and this one in blue. Oops, not that one. This one, the y equals. And we're going to graph both of those shapes. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to graph the original f of x. And then next to that, I'm going to write graph f inverse. Okay, so we're going to put 1, 2, and then there's going to be a third line we're going to graph, but I have to wait to show you from the picture. Okay, so and we're going to graph them on the same graph, but let me write the equation. So this is 3x minus 6, and this one is y equals 1/3 x plus 2. So you have two different equations, but they have a unique relationship when you graph them. That's kind of interesting. And then all inverses do, even if there's parabolas or square roots and things like that. Right now, we're just concentrating on lines. Okay, so these are both lines. So these are both y equals mx plus b. So do you remember how to graph y equals mx plus b? That's definitely going to be something that your future teachers will panic if you don't know. Okay, they're going to think, oh no, they don't know how to graph lines, and they'll be hysterical. But in the past, when I teach calculus, one of the first days of school at my old school, I always used to put 5 questions up. One was like elimination substitution question. One was a graph, y equals mx plus b. One was just solving a regular equation. I think one was factoring, and I can't remember the fifth one. And they would graph their lines wrong. And this was in calculus. So I was always a little hysterical on the first day, thinking, no, they didn't even know how to graph lines. But the summer kind of sucks your information away. So if you're expected to graph lines and you're thinking, I don't know that, you don't necessarily want to, tell your teacher, I don't know how to graph lines. I never graph lines, because that's not true. But, you say, oh, I don't remember it, but I'll review that in my last year's notes. Yes, Charlize, you're right. We do start with one other thing first, though. So we have the y-intercept, and then, yes, we do the slope, which she said is rise over run. Okay, so what was the y-intercept? Do you remember how we wrote that as a coordinate? And then we did rise over run second when you're doing the action of graphing. Anyone remember what the y-intercept was? That's where you start the graphs. And then you apply the slope to get the rest of the points. Anyone remember about the y-intercept? Yes, it was 0 blank, because y-intercept means you put an x equals 0 in. And then the y-intercept specifically was the second number, the one that was alone. Okay, so I just underlined those. So y-intercept was 0, -6. And you can also substitute the 0 into the equation if you want to find that out. So you could substitute a 0 in, or you can say it's the number at the end. It's like b. And then often in your other math classes, they might just call the y-intercept -6, and they might not put the 0 with it. And that just means you go on the y-axis, and then you go down to -6. So some books and some teachers write it with coordinates, and some books and some teachers do not write it as coordinates. Okay, so for slope, the slope is the number in front of the x when it's in y equals mx plus b form. And then Charlize said that we need to write it rise over run. So to do rise over run, we need to have a number in the denominator. So what number do we put in the denominator if there is no number in the denominator? Exactly, we put a 1. So this would be 3 over 1. And then that's the rise over run. And then this one, the slope is 1/3. That's the number in front of x. So this will be the rise on the top and the run on the bottom. Okay. Okay, so let's graph those. And we're going to graph them on the same graph. You need to make sure your graph is can go down to -6. Okay, so make sure your graph can go down to -6. And then I'm going to make my graph look a little bigger here so you guys can see it better. So the y-intercept is 0, -6. So you're going to want to remember that that's right 0, down 6. Now it's also called the y-intercept. So if you label it y, then there's a good chance you're going to remember to put it on the y-axis. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So -6 on the y-axis. I usually don't label the y-axis, which is bad, because if I labeled it, I think more of my students would know to put the y-intercept on the y-axis. I like to do it as a coordinate, but sometimes then people forget where to put it, and sometimes they put it on the x-axis. Okay, and then from there you do a slope of 3 over 1. And we're trying to find a pattern with this, so you're going to want to do the slope very carefully. Okay, so if you're on lined paper, kind of draw in the lines. Okay, so up 3, right 1. Up 1, 2, 3, right 1. 1, 2, 3, right 1. 1, 2, 3, right 1. Down 3, left 1, but you might not be able to fit that one on your graph. And then if you have some straight thing to draw this with, it would be better if you drew it straight. My straight is only my hand. So I can't really use a ruler on my tablet. And then which color was this one? This was my my yellow. And the highlighting colors, if you don't have a highlighter, is not important. But you could do the second one in another color instead of highlighter. So that's the original. So this one's f of x. So usually people label it f of x on there. Yeah, so that 30-second thing fixed my tablet. So the problem with my tablet was the screen was going off after 30 seconds. And then Google Meet didn't think I was presenting anymore. Okay, I'm going to change colors on this one also. I'm going to circle it in red so that if you just have another color, you can do that too. And then I'll also highlight it in blue so you can see. Okay, so this one, the y-intercept is 0, 2. So you're going to go 0, 2 on the y-axis. The y-intercept is always on the y-axis. And then your slope is rise 1, run 3. So up 1, right 3, up 1, right 3, up 1, right 3, down 1, left 3. That's it. And then when you have both graphs drawn, can you type in done in the chat area? Because I need to show you something, but I need you to have the graphs finished. And then we only have about 10 more minutes for our video. So put done when you finish the graphs. Okay, so remember to type done when you're done with the graphs. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people who aren't me. Okay, just making sure I don't have to type in done. And let's see, that's, I have 4. So I'm just missing 2 people. Okay, so just 1 person is left. And then you're going to want to change your, I don't know if you can find my face because I want to point something out to you on my tablet. Okay, so find the one not that has the math work, but that has my face. Okay, because I'm going to show you something with my tablet. Okay, so we're going to move on because we do have to finish. So I know one of you hasn't finished. Okay, but look at this one. Okay, so look at that. Now, it's actually symmetric. Okay, but let's see if I can show you how it's symmetric. If you twist it like this, okay, so twist it like this. And do you see how it kind of makes an X? You see how it kind of makes an X when you twist your paper? Okay, so there's a line directly down the middle. Oh, I'll put my pen there. So there's a line that directly down the middle here would make it symmetric. It's like a mirror image of each other, but it's twisted. Now it's actually the 45-degree line. So it's halfway in between this and the Y and the X axis. So it's the line that's like a 45-degree line. So I'm going to draw that line in. Okay, so let me draw it, and then now look back at the actual math screen. Okay, so I'm going to draw that line in, but the line will be easier for you to draw it in if you have it slanted. So I'm going to draw this in another color. I'm going to use green. Let me see. No, I'll use light blue. Okay, so it's this line. Actually, it's the line with the numbers that are the same. 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6, -1, -1, -2, -2. And how I know that is it's always that line. So if you draw an inverse, that line right there, which is called y equals x, is always the symmetry line. So 3 is you graph that one on there. You graph the original, you graph the inverse, and then you also graph the line y equals x. And it should be a symmetry line. So if it's not a symmetry line, then you made an error in your graphing, or you made an error when you found the inverse. So when they have you do the graphing of the originals and the inverses, they want you to also draw that symmetry line. Okay, I'm going to show you one with a table. Okay, I'm going to show you one with a table. And I'll give you one that they already give you a table on because we're running out of time. And then I'll give you your homework questions on these topics. Okay. No, let me save the table. Let me save the table. I'll save the table for next Tuesday. Okay, so let me show you another inverse one. So this is example 3, but we won't graph this one. And I want to show you one that has a fraction in the first place. So you have 1/4 x plus 2, and it says find the inverse. So it says find f inverse. Okay, and this one doesn't say to graph. Okay, so we switch x and y. Actually, I didn't switch x and y. I just replaced y with f of x, or f of x with y. And then you switch x and y. So you know this from the last question. And then you solve for y, but we're a little worried because the y has a fraction in front of it, but I'm going to show you how to handle that. You subtract the 2. X minus 2 equals 1/4 y. Now, to get rid of a fraction, you can divide, but that's harder. So what we're going to do instead is you multiply by 4/1. It's called multiplying by the reciprocal. So you multiply by 4/1, and that's what will remove those. And over here, that's just a regular 4. I'll just kind of cross out the one at the bottom. That's just a regular 4, so you get 4x minus 8. And then you switch them around to the other side. And then you write it as the inverse notation. And if you graph both of these, you would get that y equals x line down the middle. I guess we have 5 minutes left. So let me just use 3 of the minutes to show you a table. Example 4. The tables are really nice. So you have a table. This lesson's homework is due on Friday, tomorrow by midnight, but I don't grade it till Monday. So technically it's due Friday at midnight, but if you want to turn it in sometime before Monday, then you get full credit. And you get full credit anyway if you turn it in late, but it's difficult. Your assignment won't get in very quickly if you turn it in past the due date. Not past the due date, past the when I put it in the computer date. So I put it in the computer on Mondays. Okay, so let me show you example 4. Example 4 is super fast. This one's f of x. So f inverse of x, you just make a table. Make another table. And what did we say the main topic was for inverses? What was our main topic for inverses? This is only going to take us like 30 seconds to do it once we figure out this one thing. What was the main topic for inverses? We put like 2 stars by it. It's this step right here. What did we do in this step that I just made an arrow and a highlight yellow? Yes, switch X and Y. So in a table, it's super awesome. You just take the X and the Y, 2, 3, you just change it to 3, 2. You change the 3, 5 to 5, 3. You change the 4, 7 to 7, 4. And you change the 5, 9 to 9, 5. That's it. That's the answer. So the main thing on inverses is you switch X and Y. So if it's in a table, you just switch the coordinates. And that's it. It's pretty nice. I'm going to turn off the recording right now.